The Art and Science of Wealth podcast, having an impact, leaving a legacy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Art and Science of Wealth, episode 3. Our special guest today is David Specht from the Claremont Graduate University. He is the director of the Global Family Business Institute, and we're going to have a lively discussion, no doubt, about family business and related topics. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Steffi. Glad to be here.
Great. Joe?
Yeah, for those of you that are new to watching our podcast, Joe Milam here. In my prior career, I ran a multifamily office called Legacy Capital Management. I've really been studying the psychology of wealth since college. I had some seminal research that I stumbled across, and it really triggered an interest in this subject matter for a very long time. And so, and I running a multifamily office, principally old money, but located out on Sand Hill Road, Menlo Park in the early 90s. Really gave me a real interesting contrast between old money and new, and the wealth creation process and the wealth preservation process. And so it's a lot of that background that is the stimulus for some of these conversations and some of the guests we'll be bringing on. And I'm excited to meet Dave because this is the first time for me. Dave, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes.
Well, Joe, good to meet you. So as Steffi said, I'm the director of the Global Family Business Institute at the Drucker School of Management, and been there for about a little less than a year and a half. Before that, I was at Wells Fargo Private Bank, helped them develop their Family Dynamics program. And I've written a couple of books, one called The Family Business Whisperer. Before Wells, I was in Nebraska for 7 years and had my own consulting business working with multi-generational family businesses, and then developed their family business program at the University of Nebraska as well. So I have 6 kids, I'm married, and life is just fun. It's exciting.
Well, you're clearly a decade or two younger than certainly me. I'm 60, and I'm not going to guess Steffi's age, but that's a pretty profound topic for such a young man to jump into and so early in life. How did you get into the being interested in pursuing and becoming the expert that you are?
Yeah, well, I stumbled into it somewhat. I graduated from BYU, Idaho, and took a job at a bank processing loans. Can you imagine something more exciting than that, Joe? And I wasn't there very long, and I was just bored. I wanted to do something different, and my mom gave me some advice. She said, people naturally come to you to ask for advice. You should figure out, is there an advice field you could get into, maybe, I don't know, therapy and then financial services was one, but I didn't want to sell products. So I went and did my master's in finance and tax planning so that I could just develop a toolbox, so I could actually give advice. It wasn't a great program for me because it was a lot of finance and a lot of tax, and I'm more of a people person.
Yeah.
But I needed the toolbox. And so to graduate, I needed one more class. And the elective class that I chose was family business management. What happened was it blended all these techniques, tax, legal, with the human dynamics of family. And what I figured out in that class was, I could really make a career of helping people preserve their family relationships and perpetuate these businesses. And I thought, wow, if I could make a job out of this, that'd be pretty fulfilling, and it would never be boring because every family is unique and the scenarios are varied. So I kind of stumbled into it. I didn't even come from a family business, but I also had 2 families I was really close to have very different outcomes. One, a 3rd generation construction company that, their kids all learned how to work at an early age. They had good relationships with each other. They even vacationed together. They liked each other so much.
Wow.
And then there was another family that had a specialty auto company and had a tragedy. Grandpa passed away suddenly with a heart attack, and he had not shared his intentions with his kids. He had 2 kids, both in the business. So that, classic story, the attorney calls the family together. Half the business goes to mom, which was not a surprise. and the other half goes to sister, and not anything to her brother, and with no explanation as to why. You can imagine it tore the family up. Brother ended up leaving the business just a couple of months after Dad's funeral, started a competing shop, and essentially took most of the clients with him. And so I was seeing these two families have very different outcomes, and it inspired me to want to just figure this out and to help families. So that's a long answer, but that's kind of how I got into it.
That's brilliant. Well, I'm sure that some of those stories will resonate with the folks that might be listening in and eventually listening in. It's a great experience set out of classroom, pragmatic, real world, as they say, experience, and to be able to be brought in and have that level of observation is the opportunity you were fortunate to have, because very often families, new money or old money, they'll hide the things that the dysfunction, right?
Yeah.
And so very few outsiders get to actually experience it and/or hone their professional skills with that level of candor and access. So again, congratulations. That's cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Dave, tell us about your work at Claremont Graduate University at the Drucker School. Why did you make the move there? What are you doing? And then follow-on question, that's a lot right there, but the follow-on question will be interested in what trends you're seeing. But tell us first about you and how.
Yeah, so I joined the Drucker School again a little less than a year and a half ago, and just wanted to get out of the bank that I was in, and wanted to try something new. I love the education piece. I missed working with students at the University of Nebraska. I felt like I could make a big impact. There were kind of young people at a crossroads in their life, deciding whether to go back to the family business or not. So I wanted a little bit more of that in my life. And then the Drucker School has a great brand, Peter Drucker, fantastic thinker. And I felt like it would be a great way to layer on the teachings of Peter Drucker, along with kind of the best thoughts on business owning families and generational wealth, and an opportunity to combine those things in a pretty powerful way. So I've developed a certificate program for advising family enterprises, which I've rolled out to 2 different institutions so far. It's not an open enrollment program, but like financial institutions, CPA firms will have me come in and train their people on a lot of it is the non-financial challenges of working with multi-generational family businesses. So that's one of the programs. And then we're just finishing up a generational wealth masterclass with Jay Hughes. And we have a program called Authors at Drucker, where we bring in an author each month that's written on topics of generational family business or generational wealth, or about the specific family. So next month, we're bringing on the author that wrote about the Tata family, which is a huge conglomerate in India, and learning about that journey and kind of the nuanced path that they walked. So
it's almost a case study. So
for sure.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah. So those are the things I'm up to. We have a student association where we'll bring in guests that have lived the family business experience so they can talk to students. And it's also a way for the students to find their peers. It's other people that are living kind of similar scenarios. And as you know, Steffi, it's kind of hard to find peers, especially in this space where it's
important,
where there's any level of empathy, for successful families. And so it's a pretty unique environment that we have, and we're kind of developing it.
Okay, so then follow on. Since you've been in this role, what are your top 3 observations or 3 learnings that have taken you deeper into the family business world that you're seeing and doing your work with these families? And Claremont schools, and I attended Pomona College. For those who don't know the Claremont schools, they were built to be similar to the Oxford model, where there are smaller colleges. And the graduate used to be just called Claremont Graduate School, but it's now bigger. And that's the graduate arm. The other 5 are undergrad, but it's a very unique place, and you attract amazing caliber of students there.
Yeah, it's a great place. I mean, just for instance, in the last Authors at Drucker, we had 10 different countries represented on that one event, and it makes for interesting learning because, in my prior roles, I had just worked with families in the United States, and as you move to other countries and learn about other cultures and how they address multi-generational family wealth and shared ownership, and it's different and it's nuanced culture to culture, so it's a pretty rich learning environment for sure. Some of the patterns, though, I think shared ownership is one that every culture everywhere struggles with, and money is never the problem. Money just magnifies people's challenges. It also magnifies the good that they can do. So that's something that I've definitely seen clearly. I think the rising generation, many of the students are trying to find their way, trying to develop a healthy relationship with the success that their parents and grandparents have created, and also trying to individuate and find their own dream. So it's dynamic, and again, the world doesn't have a lot of empathy for those kids, and for them to have peers and a place where they can come and learn about how to interact with the wealth is pretty powerful. So I feel pretty fortunate to be there.
Do you know of any other school around the country that has some version, aside from maybe Nebraska, but any other university, some of the more, the Ivies or any other?
Yeah, there are a number of family business centers around the United States. Northwestern has a great program. Cornell has a great program. Harvard does a families in business conference. Yeah, I was just in Michigan a week and a half ago speaking at a family business center there in Saginaw, Michigan. They have a great program. There really are a lot of programs around the country that are trying to serve business owning families and help them.
Have you seen any of the content in those, any of those you've been exposed to that talk about the process of starting a company?
Well, innovation is a topic, but starting is typically not why families go to those centers. Many of them are second, third generation companies that are trying to figure out how to perpetuate themselves.
Right.
And as you know, I mean, in each generation, they have to reinvent, innovate, change, but it's usually not starting.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
No, I'm just curious.
Yeah. So can you tell us some, I mean, obviously we know that people can't come here and spill the beans on everything, but if you could tell us some stories about families that you've seen, or what are the challenges, help our listeners understand, what are the challenges that are unique to a family business of keeping that business going?
Yeah, well, I mean, the main challenge is that it's just multiple systems coming together that complicate things. So you have a family system, which is a system of unconditional love. Like, I have 6 kids. They didn't have to do anything to become valuable to me. They just showed up. And then you have a business system, which is competitive. It's market driven. It's, you either adding value or you're not. You're an asset to the business or you're a liability. And so if you look at those two systems coming together, I mean, it can be fraught with some confusion and some challenges. There's simultaneous roles people are playing: father, mother, business owner, manager, and so it's just it's complex. Go ahead.
Sounds
Sorry, Joe.
messy.
I was gonna say HR department.
HR.
Yeah,
Yeah,
messy.
compensation issues, conflict. The biggest one is expectations, though. Managing expectations, both for a child that's coming into the business, how will they be paid? How will they be held accountable? What is their job function? So many families actually are informal with bringing in their rising generation, and that informality oftentimes is what causes the problems.
Wow.
I got to tell you, that's a really insightful summation of managing expectations,
Mhm.
because that, I think, really succinctly captures some of the financial expectations, but also the emotional relationship expectations, lines of authority, managing expectations. I think that's could be a whole topic in and of itself, or a podcast in and of itself. What are the optimal tools to manage those expectations? So maybe I'll give you that sort of softball. What do you think are the best tools or tactics to manage expectations?
Well, I mean, having communication regularly. Most families do not have family meetings. So setting up mechanisms where the family can come together, learn together, have experiences together, being able to have a place that's kind of designated as a place where you can ask questions and have it be okay.
Dave, I'll stop you there for a second,
Sure.
because this is a mystery to a lot of people who look in from the outside and even from the inside. Why don't these families get together? Do they not know this is important? Do they not do it? What's the reason?
I mean, they may get together for, holidays and things like that, but
Right.
actually talk about the business, to talk about,
That's what I'm getting at.
to talk about the relationship with money. A lot of that is taboo. It's like no one knows how to do it, and so we'll just avoid it. And if we avoid it, then it's not as uncomfortable. And for entrepreneurs, many of them just decide, well, I'll just make it bigger. I'll just make the business bigger, and
That solves the problem.
they'll be happier because there'll be more.
Right.
And as you and I know, more does not minimize complexity. It just makes it bigger. So
It just makes it bigger.
Interesting. Yeah.
Your little comment is insightful. It magnifies both the good and the bad.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to clarify that, because I know a lot of people wonder. A lot of people looking in from the outside think that's obvious, but that's some insight. Anyway, keep going.
So, I mean, most families call and seek help when they're stuck, often in transitions, whether someone is transitioning in and they want to make sure they're doing it well, or a senior generation has had a health issue and they're trying to figure out, can they perpetuate the business? Do they have the cash flow necessary to actually give it to the kids and have, sufficient for their desires and retirement? So a lot of it is just trying to manage the different parties and the lens through which they're looking at the wealth and also at the business.
Mm-hmm.
Years ago, I talked about the cultural differences, and I was exposed to that many years ago from Italian Catholic first generation American family business, and death is not discussed.
Ooh.
That is the taboo subject.
Yeah.
How do you plan any succession unless you acknowledge that someone's going to die? And they wouldn't touch estate planning tactics. They wouldn't incorporate a key man life insurance. Some of the basic fundamental toolkits to manage an elegant transition, they couldn't talk about. Never forget it. And so, that it is a lot more complex, and these cultural influences. This is the psychology, right? It's not optimal tax strategies or corporate structures or offshore tool, all these sort of complexities that does tend to attract some headlines and I think distract people from these are human beings and money. And those two things are almost toxic. And then you throw in different generations, the gender differences in approaching Oh my goodness gracious. There's so many different cross currents that are just almost Shakespearean, right? And what unfolds around a business / money.
Yeah, for sure. One of the sessions that Jay Hughes and I did during our master class is called financially diverse couples. And this is an issue that we see where one of the people in the couple comes with significantly more assets than the other. And everyone just thinks, well, a prenuptial agreement is the answer. Well, it's not the answer. There needs to be conversation around, how will we be in relationship with this wealth, and what does the difference mean? In what ways are we aligned? How will this money affect how we parent? And most people just don't slow down to get into the conversations. And if you avoid those conversations, you fall back to your old familial roles. And whether that's a scarcity mentality or something else, it just needs to be addressed.
Sibling rivalries, the scar tissue from when you were 12, the birth order stuff. I mean, yeah, it opens up a whole Pandora's box. A number of years ago, again, I actually, in running that multifamily office, I actually was asked to structure and negotiate the post-nuptial agreement.
Okay.
And the husband was first generation money, but he was a senior executive at what became a public company, and the bride was from old money.
Yeah.
And she was younger than him, so there was an age power dynamics, and it was really a fascinating thing. But the whole issue was these cross currents we're talking about. Really interesting.
Yeah, and the issue of financially diverse couples is typically in the order that you talk about it, Joe. So it's when the woman brings assets to the relationship significantly more than the man does, and some of the undercurrents can be really challenging.
Yeah, that's complicated. I know some cases like that, and it's a different dynamic. It can be hard for the husband to come into this family, and and then where is his place, and who is he? And he usually at a certain age, if you're of certain generations, men are programmed to be the provider, and he's not going to be the provider. How do you deal with it?
Oh, it was interesting, and it still is to this day, by the way. Those dynamics, and this is almost 30 years ago that I did that, and so I've watched that over 30 years play out. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
David, is there I hate soundbite advice. Unfortunately, it's silly. So it's more about prioritization, and I think you've already covered it. But I'll put it back to you in that context. If you could, you had one chance to give people the best toolkit of advice you can, 3 things, what would you etch in stone that they do, period, full stop? And I know that's every situation is different, but there are cross currents that ultimately issues that impact and provoke even some of those dysfunctions in these unique situations. But the source code of the cause, I suspect, can be put into 2 or 3 buckets. So,
yeah, I'll give it a shot. So where most of the problems begin are we have planning out of order. So what happens is an entrepreneur is surrounded by smart people that bring them ideas. So one idea might be a tax saving strategy. Another one might be a gifting strategy because of a loophole or whatever in the tax code. And they hear these things and they're like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. And they execute on it. And then they realize, oh, there's people that are impacted by these structures. So now how are the people going to interact with the structure, or how they're going to feel about why I did what I did? So I typically try to turn the planning process on its head and get a couple to tell me the story of the ideal outcome for the success that you created, whether it's an operating company or whether they're liquid. How do you want your kids to be in relationship with each other? How do you want them to be in relationship with the money that you've created? And let them tell the story, and then let the professionals translate that story into techniques and tools. That's the main one where I see a lot of problems, because it's hard to undo and unwind some of these strategies that get put in place, especially when they're damaging relationships. So I would just say, if you have entrepreneurs that are listening to this, listen to the advice of your tax professional, your estate planning attorney, but don't do anything until you've walked down the road of being able to tell the story of what you want to have happen to the people that are most important to you. And I'll say this from the Rising Gen perspective. Many of these plans that get executed feel like it's something that's being done to them rather than something that's being done for them.
Oh, that's interesting.
So include the rising generation in conversations about your intentions. Let them have a voice at the table. Not that every wish that they have is going to be executed in documents and in the plan, but when they have a voice, they're a lot more accepting of the plans that get put in place and the structures that parents choose to incorporate. So it takes a little bit more time. It takes some courage, to engage the rising generation, but ultimately unwinding these plans is really brutal, and typically relationships get damaged along the way.
The examples are myriad. Again, if the firm that I ended up joining was principally old money, and so many of these things played out just by the very nature of old money, multi-generational wealth. And even my predecessor of the firm that hired me originally, his own personal affairs had some of that involved as well, even though he ran this firm before he passed and I took it over. It's that sort of physician heal thyself.
Yeah.
Right. We had estate planning attorneys that didn't have an estate plan.
Sure.
And that's, people can't believe that to be true, but I've seen it.
Yeah, for sure.
And tax accountants that obviously were dysfunctional in doing their own taxes or their own tax strategies or whatever else. And so I think a major thing is you cannot assume, because people have a lot of zeros, that they're elegant in how they got there. That makes sense.
Yeah, and you also can't assume that someone that's really good at building a business is going to be really good at transitioning a business, because what superpowers they had, to be able to get through tough times, to be resilient, to be innovative. Some of those things actually work against them in giving up control, in trying to include the voice of others. Yeah. So I have a lot of empathy for them. But it's not easy.
They're relinquishing their identity by doing so.
Oh yeah.
And that ain't easy for anybody, regardless of what your identity is.
Yeah. Now, Dave, you've mentioned Jay Hughes a couple of times. A lot of people don't know who he is. And I knew his name, but I never saw him until your webinar a few weeks ago. I've jokingly referred to him as my Mr. Snuffleupagus. I know he exists, but I've never seen him. But please tell us who Jay is and how you managed to get him to come out of what I think was largely retirement, and what you're doing together.
Yeah, so Jay is he's like a sage. He's just wise. He's worked with some of the wealthiest families in the world as an attorney. And I think he had kind of a midlife shift of figuring out that, the highest and best use of his time was not actually creating legal structures for them, but in working with them on, at the intersection of the financial and the non-financial issues. And he really became known as an author and has written, I think, 5 books now.
Mhm.
Family Wealth, Compact Among Generations. He's turning 80 here in a week and a half.
Wow.
So this project was really twofold. One was to kind of celebrate and to memorialize his work so that it could live on. And, the other was to bring it to the Drucker School and to incorporate it. Peter Drucker plus Jay Hughes is a pretty powerful combination. So,
Yeah.
For a family business, that's a 1-2 punch. That's hard to beat.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's the
Yeah.
most generous man I've ever met.
Wow.
He's been so generous with me and his time and sharing his wisdom, and has become a great friend.
Wow.
When I appeared on the family office scene around 2007, he was on. I heard his name and I saw him speaking at a few things, but I never had the privilege of seeing him. And then he kind of faded away. Yeah, that's great that you got him and you are capturing his knowledge. I think there are this family office thing is relatively new, but family businesses have been around forever. And it's so important to get the wisdom of there's a generation of people that are retiring and going to pass soon, and we have to get what they know. It's valuable. We don't want to have to keep learning these lessons.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I consider him an elder, and he would say he's an elder. And again, society doesn't do a good job of celebrating elders. And, we tend to
American society.
American society
Yeah.
tend to put people on a shelf, when their working career is done, and it's a mistake.
It's a huge mistake.
Mhm.
As the elder on this call, I can tell you it's a huge mistake.
No one's going to I can't see you sitting on a shelf anywhere anytime soon. And I sure wouldn't.
No, one of the pieces I read that got me so interested in the psychology of wealth, the importance of this early on, because I didn't come from a wealthy family, a very middle class, actually broken home sort of stuff. Father was an alcoholic, parents divorced when I was young. The usual cliche American story. And I ended up stumbling across an article, 2 of them, but one of them was why wealth stays in European families through more generations than American families. That alone was a really interesting conversation. And the second one was, and this one was a little bit more recent. This might have been 30 years ago. Was that if you stay productive in life, and this was a whole big report on this, that you'll make more money. This is pure economic measure after you're 55 than you did cumulatively before. And it wouldn't explain the science and the data and the study, but also then interpreted the why. Why was that the case? Because you get better. You have Rolodexes of experts. You've learned how to spot somebody that knows what they're doing versus somebody that's just a salesperson. You're less driven by ego. You're less, just maturity, right? The maturity of your own personal resources, your maturity of your own skill sets, the maturity of your Rolodex. You just get better.
Yeah, Peter Drucker called them, knowledge workers. And as you accumulate knowledge and you accumulate experience, you gain wisdom, and you can actually get things done faster because of the people that you have connections with.
Same thing.
And you avoid some of the bloody noses that you had when you were 25 and 30.
I'm wondering if he wrote that article, because that's paraphrase the two main reasons. It is the wisdom, your personal balance sheet, your personal skill set becomes more efficient, more elegant, more wise. And also you learn how to avoid those stupid decisions, the bloody noses, as you called it. And you might have been the author of that article, Brian. I just don't remember. A long time ago. And yet, the Western culture and principally American culture obviously spends way too much energy celebrating youth, because that's where the commercialization of selling consumer goods, you can establish brand loyalty and brand hook, if you will, the earlier you can get them. And so that there's a cultural tone that is, unfortunately, I think, fairly nefarious as the cause of why we don't value wisdom and folks and celebrate so much of the youth culture.
Well, I think when you're young, you're trying to figure out, where happiness comes from. And so you chase some things, you buy some things, and you figure out that's actually that's not doing it for me. And, for me, having kids was something that changed my perspective on what was important. And so I think it's pretty natural you're just more stable a little bit later, and you have some resources, and I think the relationship capital is probably the biggest one, though. You have people that you can take your ideas to, people that you can partner with. And again, you're just more mature, and you've seen more.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's again brilliant. Thank you. And
Well,
again,
go ahead.
no, you go, Steffi.
Oh, no, I was going to say it. I think with age comes clarity, and you stop needing to prove anything or needing to look a certain way. I remember when I was in London, I went to a fund manager presentation, and there were a couple of guys in the back of the room that I swear were like the hecklers on the Muppet Show. And so this poor guy he explains his fund, he opens the floor for questions, and well, why did you this? The other guy, well, what were you thinking when you did that? And I'm watching these two, and wow, this is, am I in the Muppet Show? And I went back and met them, and I chatted with them, and I'll always remember one of them said, at my age, I just want to get straight to the point, and I just want to know, and I'm not varnishing what I say anymore.
And I don't care anymore.
And I don't care anymore.
That's a dangerous person when they don't care anymore.
Freeing, very freeing. Yeah.
One of the clients we had from our that old firm, again, this is one of the relationships that my predecessor had, was John Gardner. And he was the really one of the most distinguished men in the United States that elegantly navigated between academia, business, and government. He went to Stanford, was on the swim team, knew Hewlett and Packard when they were at Stanford in the same era, so that he's of that era. Then he went through and did a number of things, was on lots of boards. Lyndon Johnson actually brought him in, and he was the architect of the head of health education and welfare, the Great Society. He was actually the architect. And all the other politicians tore apart what he had actually architected, and it became the dysfunction. But he was so well respected, Nixon asked him to be his vice presidential running mate in '68, and he turned that down. And then he became a professor at Stanford's business school, and he wrote the book on leadership. And I remember he was a client of ours. I got to meet John Gardner and his wife and daughter Francesca Gardner, and sit and have lunch with him and my boss. And he had just written the book on leadership, and he talked about, really it was about some of the things you just said, Steffi, is that, he says one of the greatest gifts of getting older is not caring what anybody else thinks anymore. That sounds overly simplistic.
Yeah.
But a guy of that stature to offer up that level of wisdom, that simplicity of wisdom, with that collection of experience and background he had in his rearview mirror, didn't take me long to say, I'm going to adopt that as soon as I can, as soon as my ego gets out of the way. I'm not going to care what anybody else thinks as soon as I possibly can, because I just cut to the chase of that wisdom, not have to live life lessons the hard way and get there roughly at 80 years of age, I think is what he was at the time.
So
Every age and stage has has its own unique opportunity, though. Being young,
Right.
I just remember thinking, the world is my oyster. I can go out and do anything because I got time and I have energy. And so ages and stages.
That's a good one, because I was going to say, Dave, don't fast forward, don't wait. You too cannot give a damn right now today. Okay, let's take another turn. We could talk about this one all day. But Dave, you wrote an article with Jay about the shared dream fallacy.
Yeah, the shared dream fallacy. So for a long time, I've been talking to people about, where a business has an opportunity to transition from one generation successfully is when they have a shared dream. Well, there's no such thing as a shared dream. however many billion people there are on the earth. Last night, we all had dreams. Some of those dreams we woke up and remembered, others we didn't remember. Some of them we told someone about, and maybe the dreams resonated with someone else. But ultimately, whatever dream I had last night was my dream. It wasn't my wife's dream, it wasn't my kid's dream. So we take that concept into the business space and saying, for entrepreneurs, their dream is theirs. And ultimately it starts with, kind of this thought. Then that thought kind of leads them to do something about it. Then they work like crazy, and sometimes they realize and take something and make it matter, make it real, from energy to matter. And that's kind of the stages we're talking about there. The tricky part is how we interact with each other's dreams, Steffi. And that's where it gets really complex, especially with multi-generational family businesses. And there's a lot of dynamics with interacting with other people's dreams.
Mhm. And that must be a major issue in a family business. I can think of one family in Chicago, restaurateurs. They are well known for their amazing Chicago deep dish pizza. And it's gone through generations. And one son did not want to make pizza. He wanted to go to New York and make other kinds of food.
Yeah.
And luckily the family got okay with that. So his dream was different than their dream. And it's messy when someone's dream isn't the same as the family dream.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad though when one person's dream basically becomes a black hole and sucks everyone else in and destroys, their own passions, their own interests. And so I think we need to just be aware and awake to the power of our own dreams and the interests of others.
My had an uncle married my mom's sister, and he came from old money, and he became an entrepreneur himself down in Santa Barbara. And my cousins worked for their dad, but couldn't make that transition.
Yeah.
And I watched this unfold. I was very close to my uncle and worked with him every summer during high school and college. And I watched this unfold because my cousins were 9 and 14 years younger than me. And I watched that dynamic you just described unfold. And my uncle was brilliant. And he literally was a highly educated man, engineering background, a bit of a Renaissance man, voted the most eligible bachelor in Santa Barbara when he was 30. And then he married my aunt shortly thereafter. So he was quite the guy. And yet he rejected that sort of wealthy background. He ran from it. And literally he bit tubing for a living, got his hands and fingernails dirty. Now he was highly engineered to me. You'd make roll cages of cars and design things, highly engineered and designed things. And my cousins just couldn't work with their dad. They wanted to, and he wanted to keep the business going. And so that, I'm sorry, you triggered a memory of what you just described, because it was almost a black hole. They struggled for their own, and they're two young men, and so they struggled with their own identities with this black hole of my uncle, because he was a big, strong personality and Austrian by background. And so he had a perspective that was, let's just say, not nearly as woke or as sensitive or as accommodating to two boys that wasn't going to follow my God path. And I just throw it up there because it really triggered a memory and put a real face to it.
And for a first generation entrepreneur, it's hard to even understand why someone wouldn't want to take what they've developed. It's already successful. It's here already. It's born. Why would you not want to take this and make this yours and make it even bigger and make it better? But if that's not the dream, that's not the dream.
Yeah, the younger of the two cousins landed and worked with his dad the most, and he sort of adopted a lot of it. And he actually is becoming an entrepreneur. He ended up becoming an expert in welding, different
Okay.
exotic materials, and all. Learned that working for his dad. Went off on his own in Santa Barbara, and he went to work for a steel infrastructure company that would go in and design the steel infrastructure for big exotic houses there in Santa Barbara, or small buildings and office. Anyway, he's now taken over that business. He didn't take over his dad's own business, but he's actually now taking over that business.
Yeah.
It's really an interesting, full circle. And the older brother cousin, he kind of went off and did the sort of creative side. He's a cameraman in Hollywood and involved and he married it. His wife is a lovely gal, and she had a fair amount of resources. So it's a lot of these things have played out, and I've had a front row seat to see it over 50 years now.
Very cool.
Even inside the family. So anyway, thank you for that. It's fun to trigger some of those even personal family members.
Yeah, and in the article further down, Dave talks about dream cynics, dream tolerators, dream manipulators, dream supporters, and dream adopters. Which I thought that's very helpful to know, that then you can identify who in your family or who in your life is which one of those, and then you have to manage them accordingly.
Yeah, so Jay and I were working on these archetypes because we were trying to figure out, how do we simplify this? Because it's complex. It just feels like, it's confusing sometimes when someone doesn't attach onto your dream, and or if you're struggling to interact with your parents' dream, and you want to, differentiate. And so, yeah, we came up with these archetypes, and the dream cynic is the one that just shuts you down. They find all the reasons why it won't work, and they're actively trying to get you to kill the dream. The dream tolerators are, a little different. They're kind of like, we'll go along with it, but they're not invested. They're not really encouraging you, but they're not actively trying to kill your dream either.
Right.
And the next one are dream manipulators. And this is a group that's particularly dangerous, I think, in that, they see that the business has created opportunities, it's creating wealth. It's not their dream, but they see that they can extract something from this other dream.
And effort.
Say that again?
And effort.
Yeah, and effort. And these people are takers oftentimes, and not givers. And if you have enough, you're surrounded by enough takers, you know how that goes. It's just a burden, and ultimately it doesn't work out. Then you get to the dream supporters, and these are the people that are cheering you on. They're bringing their relationships, their resources to help you. And, we need those people, but it still isn't their dream. And then you finally get to the archetype of those that are dream adopters and adapters. So those that take the dream, they actually see it for what it is. They appreciate it. They don't want to do the same thing with it, but they do make it their own, and then they put their own signature on it. So it's just a kind of a simplistic way of looking at how people interact with our dreams, and also how we show up for other people, so that we can know, like, am I a cynic? I mean, I need to be realistic with myself as to how I'm interacting with the dreams of my kids, whether it's a business or anything else. But anyways, pretty simple framework, but the archetypes were kind of fun to put together.
It was a good article.
I'll bet one of the things that comes to mind is in pulling those together, did you ever discuss how people might move through different archetypes, so they can be a cynic and then they jump on the bandwagon later on, so they sort of change their archetype behavior?
Good question.
That's a good question, Joe. I think a big part of it is just being alert to how we're acting and how we are interacting. We may not think of ourselves as a cynic. We may not think of ourselves as someone that's basically taxing someone else and their dream. But for us to be alert to it and to know that there are other choices that we can make in terms of how we interact with other people's dreams. That was the main point.
Okay. Oh, that's good.
And then there's a little bit of a dark side to the dream that I see, and I call it the Moby Dick syndrome, where like Captain Ahab, the dream it ain't working, but you're gonna go down with the ship. You will chase that thing like Ahab chased Moby Dick, and you will go down with the ship rather than say, okay, it didn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe
Well, a big part of that is because our identity gets so closely connected that we can't give up on it, because it's like we're giving up on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I've been there.
Yeah.
I can think of where I should have, you get like a dog with a bone, you're just not going to let go because you don't, I've got it in my mouth, I don't want to let go. And that's the only neg. I think dreams are great. And that's, everything that exists in the world started with a thought that turned into a dream that inspired action. But that's the one kind of a downside that isn't often discussed.
Well, I do think it's healthy to have people that will challenge our dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we do get those questions, the dream can get refined, the opportunity can get clarified. So we don't need to be surrounded by people that are just Pollyanna and are saying, rah, rah, go for it. It's important that we have people that are truth tellers in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't just be surrounded by cynics either. And we can't be just surrounded by only supporters. I know for me, when someone says I can't do something, that's actually gas for me. It's fuel. And not everyone is that way, but that I've learned that about myself. And so sometimes it's helpful to have some doubters around you too. It's just needing to be aware of what works for you and what gives you energy and what takes your energy.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening. And we thank our guest, Dave Specht of the Global Family Institute at Claremont Graduate University. Thank you, Dave, for being here. Please, if you enjoyed the show, leave us a good review. We would love you for it. Give us a 2 thumbs up or however many thumbs up we can get. And please join us next time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching and listening to the Art and Science of Wealth podcast, Having an Impact, Leaving a Legacy. Edited and produced by Nicholas Peck.